everything you need to know about products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on CL 650.
And welcome back to Quay Pacific Strata Life on CL 650. I'm Tony Gioventu, your host. Just a reminder before we forget, if you do like to get some response to your questions and you'd like to send us an email, you can send your email to questions@strata.life. And we've managed to get Dan O'Hearn, the president of Quay Pacific, to join us in the studio. And we're going to talk about a kind of an interesting perspective from the angle of the property manager, who kind of is the team captain when we're dealing with a lot of the projects for painting, restoration, emergency services, it's a big deal for the managers.
It can be, and we try to work with councils too, because a lot of times the councils want involvement in that process as well. So our involvement's going to vary anywhere from just simply arranging for quotations to helping spearhead the entire project. So it's going to depend on each individual council and the contract you have in place.
Well, and I suspect that some strata councils will want you to take total responsibility for the project, and other strata councils will say, well, you go out and you get the quotes and you get the information for us, but once we've got it, we're going to coordinate this. And so the relationships are different with each strata corporation, aren't they?
Very true, and different to the contract you have in place as well. So we can have a contract, like an accounting consulting contract, where we've been asked to marshal the whole thing along, and we may be bringing in other experts, because sometimes you're going to want somebody else to quote out this scope out this work, receive the quotations, bring it forward to council, help negotiate, make sure contracts are in place, make sure the insurance is in place, be the liaison with between the owners and the contractors, because there's often lots of coordination that needs to go on, whether forming of scaffolding that's going to be going up, so whatever the case might be. So we can be as involved or as little involved as the individual council requires.
I often think that property managers sometimes have the hardest job, because they might have 5 or 8 buildings they're managing, but the relationship with those buildings might all be different. They could potentially have a different job description relating to each building.
That's very true, and we're a smaller firm and we're a boutique firm, so we like to customize the service or tailor the service depending on each strata corporation. But you're exactly right. Is no one council is the same. The dynamics for us also change every year with a new council, and one council may be very hands off and simply give us the direction and not the how to do it, but require us to have it done. And then next year you have another election, a whole new council, and they want to be absolutely hands-on every single aspect of it. So it's a particular challenge for property managers, and that's why the fitment is important, right? And we have to assess that role every year.
Well, and underneath all of that is the one issue that every strata corporation and every property manager will always struggle with is, where do we get the money to pay for these things?
Yeah, and sure. That's the biggest struggle, isn't it?
Well, we all do, right? Everyone struggles with that.
I've got an expression, most problems can be solved with time or money. And you have to remember, when you live in a corporation, partly what you're doing is you're giving up your time because you want someone else to do this, which means it's going to be money. And listening to some of the CanStar's comments, and the sort of the common sort of flooding that happens, a lot of this is going to be also a requirement of maintenance.
Right. And
you have people on the ground floor that would really appreciate the vertical and horizontal stacks being cleaned once in a while, so that they're the ones that have the suffrage when the toilets back up or the sinks back up. You have caulking that needs to be taken care of, roofs that need to be taken care of. All this boils down to good budgeting to begin with, and I think everyone often wants to have a property that's well maintained, but they forget that that's going to have some costs associated with it.
But would you say depreciation reports, I think from my perspective, depreciation reports have, if they're a reliable report, have been a big help, because they've given people a bit of a roadmap now, a bit of an idea when these things are coming up and how much they're eventually going to cost.
I think it's awesome. We as an industry, I believe, really supported the idea, and it's a tool now that we can take, because property management companies have been advocates of this I believe, for a long time, certainly trying to put together maintenance plans, but it's really taken this other professional now coming in to really validate that, the importance of maintenance and legislation, of course, now to requirement.
Yeah.
So it's excellent to sit there and now really schedule out all the maintenance that needs to be done.
So taking a major project. So a depreciation report has identified that painting is going to be due on a building. You have a 100-unit apartment building, and they're due for painting of their wood trim and their fascias and soffits and the siding, and it's going to be due in 2017. Where does the role of the property manager come in, help with this planning process?
Well, interpreting that plan, I mean, what does that mean, 2017? That's just around the corner. How are they funding this depreciation report? Are they doing it by special levies, or are they doing straight line funding? So this is all going to make a difference. The building's going to be around for 100 years, and there's going to be maintenance that needs to be done all this time, but it's funded by people who live in there, typically of increments of 3 to maybe 7 or 8 years, right? So no one really wants to be funding this all the time, but our role would be recognizing the capital that's going to be needed, and then having a discussion with the council how they want to fund this, either with a special levy or to increase the maintenance fees. And I think it's important to, you want to go into this with your eyes open. Where is this happening?
Well, and the longer in advance you know, the better prepared you can be.
Absolutely,
right? Right? And that's the essence of it. I think one of the relationships that Stratas struggle with is, do we get quotes on something? At what point is it important? We're getting our building painted. Obviously, it's going to be a multi-$100,000 project. It's a reasonable time to be getting quotes, and that's where you'd mentioned you bring in other professionals to help you with the technicals and the quoting process. But what about small jobs? So we have a small painting job at $25,000. You know, how do you get a competitive quoting basis and then actually make that fair when there isn't really enough money involved to warrant actually having independent parties?
Well, and then also whether everyone even wants to have it done. I mean, this is a home, and collectively you might have 100 people in there with opinions that paint is good enough, we don't need to do it, we have other priorities, right? So first of all, I think it's coming to consensus of the ownership whether or not we're going to be doing it this year or next year or in a couple of years, and that's where if they adopt the depreciation report, then we'll all know that it's coming up at an annual general meeting, putting some budget line items in there, making sure that there's going to be some funding for this, having that discussion in advance. And sometimes some of the funding will be preliminary. It might be putting enough money for a consultant or a professional. But for quotations for anything over $25,000, certainly multiple quotes. But let's not get hung up. Sometimes jobs are just $1,000 here and there. And our policy would be, at $1,000, we're going to use a trusted contractor that they know, like, and trust, and we're not going to be burdened down by a lot of quotes. A lot of times you're going to have a contractor will come forward, give you great value, good price, and it's someone that we know, we like, we trust, and it would be, Camstar or Remdahl certainly fall in that category, and they're going to give us the best price possible. They know they have to be honest with us in order to get continued business, right? So sometimes it's not about getting 3 quotes for small jobs. Sometimes it's moving ahead with individuals that we know that can deliver on time and on budget.
So before we run out of time, let's jump into emergencies.
Yep.
So we have a flood in a building. The first call comes to the property manager.
Yeah.
So your firm provides emergency call services or an emergency service response service to your clients. How does that work with respect to the relationship, the role that the property manager plays in that?
Well, often we are the first one who's called, and often we're the ones who are dispatching the emergency restoration. I think this is the first thing I want to remind every single homeowner out there: they have to have insurance.
Absolutely.
We had a recent incident. 8 units were affected. 1 person had insurance.
Yeah.
And the issue is not so much you may feel that you have nothing of value in your own unit, but where would you live for 3 months while work is being done? And these people are out of pocket, staying in hotels or burdening friends and family, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing I want to make sure it's clear. We'll always dispatch an emergency restoration firm, and at that time also there's an evaluation of where liabilities might lay.
Right.
And I think homeowners often be surprised that they often have a liability to pay a deductible, or at least the amounts under the deductible.
So the emergency services are called, they get on site,
Mm-hmm.
they do the initial mitigation of the loss and damage,
Mm-hmm.
and then the insurance company and the manager involved to figure out what happens next.
What happens next, and the restoration work and the repair work.
Right.
And again, the homeowners must understand that a lot of times they're not only liable for someone else's damages, but they're liable for their own repairs.
Right.
Because the insurance is only good for original equipment. So
Right.
that's the hardwood floor or new carpet, countertops, paint on the wall if it's not
Right.
original. So homeowners really need to understand that the corporation is not going to assume the liability and make repairs to everything in their suite.
Right, right. And so, so you probably, I'd suspect that the strata manager probably has a big relationship here in making sure that people understand their responsibilities.
Every annual general meeting, we make an announcement, and like I said,
Oh, yeah.
Tony,
For the 30% of the people who show up at the annual
30,
general
that's
meeting.
right, and of that, only 5% actually, they realize,
Yeah.
oh, we have to have insurance.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
go to your broker and ask for a risk of loss assessment coverage.
Right.
Because you
Right.
may have to pay the deductible.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dan. It's great to have you on the show. Hopefully, we'll get you to come back on the show in the future,
Love
and
to.
we can talk about some of the issues, especially long-term planning. I think with implementing depreciation reports, that would be a great show to be able to talk about that and look at that a little bit closer. I'm Tony Giaventu, your host of Quay Pacific Strata Life on CIL 650. If you have any questions, you can email them to us at questions@strata.life. And Dan O'Hearn, President of Quay Pacific, thanks again for coming
Thanks so
on the
much,
show.
Tony.
And we'll look forward to our next show.
There's still more ahead with Experts on Call on CIL 650.